Hey guys, so I'm back with block 6 of the Lucky Star Block of the Month quilt. This two-toned block that you see right here, we're going to be using, of course, our white background fabric, and we're going to be using this lovely red. We're going to be making two individual block units that we've made before. It's going to be a half square triangle block, and then it's going to be an hourglass block. I already drew my line, my diagonal line down the center. I'm going to pin these together, right sides together like this, and I'm going to sew on either side of this diagonal that I drew. I'm going to chain sew everything. So I have my diagonal, everything is pinned. I'm going to chain sew, stitching on either side of my blue diagonal by 1/4 of an inch, and we'll see those half square triangles materialize. Here we go. Okay, so I have 4 of these 5.5 inch squares that I'm going to make my half square triangle blocks with, and these are going to become my hourglass blocks. I'm going to stitch a scant 1/4 of an inch on either side of this center line. Okay, so I went ahead and did my chain sewing. So you see everything is connected in one nice long piece, and I stitched a 1/4 inch on either side of that blue diagonal. Now, from previous videos that you guys have watched, you've heard me talk about using a 1/4 inch foot on your sewing machine. This is key. Please make sure that you're using something that's going to help you to keep a consistent 1/4 inch. I'm not just using a 1/4 inch, but I'm using a scant 1/4 inch, which is just a little bit smaller. When I say smaller, I'm talking like a couple of strands of thread. Smaller seam allowance than the standard 1/4. So what that's going to do is allow for me, when I cut this in half, it's going to give me just a little bit bigger space for my half square triangle block that I've created. I'm then able to trim it down a little bit to make it the size that it actually needs to be. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and clip them apart. And once I clip them apart, I can cut them in half. So now I have them all separated into my halves. And when I open them, I have that nice half square triangle block. I'm going to press my seam allowance toward the red on all of them. When you press, make sure you set your seam first with the color that the seam allowance is going to go under. On top, open it up just enough to get your iron, the edge of your iron in, to push it across. Working on a wool pressing mat also helps quite a bit. It helps to get the heat coming up from the bottom of the fabric and give you a nice flat seam. Okay, so I've pressed all of my half square triangle blocks. They measure roughly 5 inches. So the next step in order to make the hourglass block is to draw a diagonal down the center of half of your half square triangle blocks. Okay, so I have 8 of them here total. I'm going to take 4 of them and draw a diagonal from end to end. The diagonal needs to go through both the white fabric and the red fabric. Once I have that diagonal drawn, now I'm going to put 2 of my half square triangle blocks together, making sure that opposite fabrics touch each other. So I'm going to have the red laying on top of the white on one side, and of course the red underneath the white on the other side. We pressed our fabric, our seam allowances, toward the red fabric. So what that does is make sure that when we lay them on top of each other, the seam allowances are going in opposite directions. So the bottom one is going this way, the top one is going to my left, and it allows that seam to nest really nicely together. Once the seam is together, you can feel it. Rub your fingers and you can feel that it's actually flat and smooth. If it feels bumpy, then you're not nested properly. If there's like a gap in between, you're not nested properly. You need to be able to feel that there is no gap, there's no bump going on at all. So I'm going to go ahead and pin on this side that has the center line drawn. In pinning, I'm going to want to go ahead and pin on either side of that seam, just like this, so that this seam allowance is going to be pinned down flat. And if I flip it over, this side of the seam allowance is also pinned down flat. That's going to help in keeping everything stable. So I'll do that on all 4. So now that I have all 4 of them pinned, now I'm gonna go ahead and do that same stitching on either side of the blue line. A scant 1/4 of an inch is what I'll use. Once those are stitched, then I'll cut it in half and open it up, and we'll have our 1/4 square triangle block. Okay, so I have them all put together again. Just as clarification, a 1/4 square triangle block is the same thing as an hourglass block. So let me cut these apart and then press them, and I'm going to press them open. So to press it, I'm going to lay the block face down and just use my index finger as a lead, and I'm just using the tip of the iron initially to open up that seam. There we have it, nice and flat. As I come along with my iron, I don't want to flip this seam or that seam in the opposite direction. I want to make sure that they stay in the direction that they were pressed in initially. So now that we have all 8 of our 1/4 square triangle blocks, hourglass blocks made, we need to trim it down. The finished size of the block is roughly 4 3/4, give or take a bit. They're all going to be a little bit off. So what you're going to do is find half of 4 1/2, which comes down to 2 1/4. The 1/4 inch mark is going to hit right in the middle of that intersection of your block. Your square ruler also has a diagonal that runs from the top right corner to the bottom left corner. Make sure that that diagonal lies directly on top of the seam. Once you have your ruler in position, you'll notice that there is a little bit of fabric on the right hand side and along the top. Those 2 bits need to be cut off. I trimmed those 2 off, and now I can rotate my block underneath so that my 2 clean edges are now on the left edge and on the bottom. It's those 2 edges that will now be lined up with the 4 1/2 inch line on my ruler. So I'm going to do that again for the remainder of my pieces, making sure that everything comes out to that 4 1/2 inch size. It's not a whole lot, but it really does help, guys, to trim up your blocks before you start putting them together into the larger block, because everything will go in properly. The other part of this block that we're making today is just a simple 1/2 square triangle block. I'm not gonna bore you with the details of this because we just did that, right? In order to make the 1/4 square triangle block, I have everything pinned. These are 5-inch squares, white and red, same colors. I have the diagonal drawn. I have everything pinned. I'm just gonna zip it all together in a way that you know that it already goes together. So guys, this block, this 1/2 square triangle unit has to come to 4 1/2 inches as well. We're not going to worry about the 2 1/4 coming over from the edge, but we are going to make sure that the diagonal on the ruler sits directly on the diagonal on the fabric. And then there's a little bit of fabric to trim off both side to side and top to bottom. And this is just a refresher from what we've already worked on with some of the other blocks in previous videos. So I went ahead and trimmed up my 1/2 square triangle blocks, and of course here are my little shavings there. Now the next step is to assemble everything into the 9-patch block that it's supposed to be. So it's gonna go something like this. We have our 1/4 square triangle blocks happening here. We have our 1/2 square triangle blocks happening there, and in the center we're just gonna have a simple white square. Isn't that lovely? So we're gonna just assemble this in just like a regular 9-patch. Top row 1 2 3, center row and bottom row. Once we have those and pressed, then we're going to assemble 1 2 3. And I'm gonna chain sew as much as I can because it goes faster. Okay, so now I have all 3 of my rows put together. I'm gonna press them with the seam allowances going in opposite directions. So for the top and the bottom rows, I'm gonna push the seam allowance to the 1/2 square triangle blocks on the outside. The center row, I'm gonna push toward the center to the solid fabric on the middle, and then the bottom is gonna go out again. All right, guys, this is so satisfying. I hate to use that word, but this is so satisfying. Look at how cute that block is. So I did my 9-pat, put it together like a 9-pat. Row 1, row 2, row 3. You see that I have these chunky unpressed seams running horizontally. So now I'm going to just take it over to the iron and press those open to make my finished block nice and flat. And then we're going to be done. Again, it is super important to make sure that as you're pressing your seams open, use just the tip of your iron to make sure that you're not interfering with any of the other seams that are involved in this block. So here we are with the finished product. Now this is block 6A. This month, however, we have 2 primary blocks. We have this one and block 6B. You also have a smaller 3rd block to work through. But that one I'm not going to do with you because you have all the skills. If you enjoyed what you saw in this video, please go ahead and like it and subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. I hope you enjoyed what I put together today. Click on that video over there so that you can get 6B and continue on with the process. Thanks so much. Bye.